Okay, so today's to structure a poetry comparison. Now, it is very important that you remember that your teachers may have taught you a different method of how to structure a poetry comparison, but please do feel free to use that and not feel like you have to do the one that I'm teaching you today. But if the one that I teach you today helps, then please feel free to also use that. We're going to look at mainly one way of how to organize a comparison, but I will mention a few others if you are interested. Right, so let's see if I'm professional enough with this technology to do what I want to do of sharing this screen. Okay, right. Can everybody see this? Yeah, okay, good. All right, good. Everyone can see it. If you can't see it because you're on a phone, then please don't worry, it will be recorded, but also I will be going through it verbally. Yes, I will, Zainab. I'll put it on the YouTube actually instead of the class charts because it's easier for everyone to get on. All right, so how do you structure a poetry comparison? We are going to look at an example question so that we are all on the same page of what we are doing. Let me just add some people. Okay, so we're going to look at an example that I did with my class, which is how do neutral tones and one other poem from the anthology explore heartbreak? Now, we're not going to be writing it, but we will look at step by step how to go through it. And we will look at a few examples at the end from some of the students who have written responses to this, okay? So the very first thing that you're going to have to think about is which other poem am I going to compare this to? Because choosing that poem is going to be crucial. If you choose a poem that only mentions some sort of heartbreak once, then it's going to be very, very difficult for you to write an entire comparison essay. And therefore, you need to really select your comparing poem very carefully. Right, so let's see in the chat which poems you might compare neutral tones to if you are talking about heartbreak. Walking Away, says Holly, good. Yeah, Profuse Lover, says May, good. When We Two Parted, very good. Sarah, that's the one we're going to use today. When We Two Parted, Sophie. Okay, great. So a lot of them do discuss heartbreak, but if I choose a topic like, or if I choose a poem like When We Two Parted, I know that I'm going to have a lot of information to use, and I know that I'm going to have a lot of content and examples. So that's what I'm going to go for. And now the second step is to break it down the theme in the question. So the theme in the question is obviously heartbreak. Okay, so we're going to break that down and we're going to look at the two different techniques that I'm going to go through, once more so in detail than the other, but you have two options. Am I going to structure my essay with a language comparison, and a structure comparison? Or option two, if you see on the screen, am I going to go sub-theme 1, sub-theme 2, sub-theme 3? Both are valid, and I'm sure that your teachers have taught you different methods. But today we're going to be focusing on option 2, more so than option 1, although I will show you an example of what option 1 looks like at the very end. If it confuses you, don't worry, we will be looking at that. Okay, so let's see in the chat again. If you looked just at the word heartbreak, what ideas come to mind? Okay, so what connotations does the word heartbreak have? May says obsession, good. Love, good. Unrequited love, distance, good. Emotional pain, betrayal, separation, pain, guilt. Perfect. So as you can see, for those of you who are slightly confused, anger, beautiful, we are looking for things that link to the idea of heartbreak. If someone is experiencing heartbreak, what are some of the emotions that they might be feeling? What are some of the ways that they might be acting out? What are some of the ways that they might express that heartbreak to other people? I can see Rui put confusion as well. Very good. So I'm going to put a few on the PowerPoint so that you can see them. Okay. If you look up, Joe, by the way, you're on private. So if you want to change your chat to everyone, then everyone can see what you're saying. All right. So we have a lot of different sub-themes. For example, I put some up there. You guys already mentioned most of these, but denial, emotional distance, sadness, aggression, passion, frustration, coldness, anger, loneliness, denial. All right. So we have a lot of options out there, grief. And now we have to think of 3 that really work for our one comparison. So as I said, for today's example, I'm going to use When We Two Parted compared to Neutral Tones, because I think both of them really express that theme of heartbreak. And I'm going to choose 3 of my sub-themes, or 3 of the connotations that I came up with to organize my paragraphs. Okay? All right. So in this case, I've chosen obsession, frustration, and emotional distance, okay? Because there's a lot to say about those 3. You don't want to pick one like denial if in both poems they don't talk about denial of the relationship ending, all right? So what does that mean? That now means that I have the structure for each paragraph. If you look on the left side, and it says option 2, that's highlighted. Each paragraph now has a sub-theme, as we call it, okay? The sub-theme being a mini theme that was created from the main theme that was in our question. So we had heartbreak and we broke it down into 3 different subjects, okay? And therefore, we can now create topic sentences. Before I keep going, there's somebody in the call that is not on mute. Make sure you mute yourself, okay? So that we don't hear everything that you're doing. All right, Jalen says obsession links to When We Two Parted a lot. Exactly. So the 3 that I've chosen, hopefully you will see link to both poems quite strongly. All right, so what do I do with these 3? I create my topic sentences. Topic sentences are the first sentence that you put in each paragraph, okay? So for example, both poets demonstrate the theme of heartbreak through their discussion of obsession. Now, this is important because if we want the high-level grades, we want to be able to show our examiners that we are able to bring the 2 poems together before we start showing their differences. Because if all we talk about are the stark differences, so the really extreme differences between the 2, then we're not really comparing them. We're just listing differences. So we want to make sure we have some kind of similarity, which in this case is the fact that they both talk about obsession to show how heartbroken they were, right? So another example, paragraph 2 would start with the sentence, both poets look at the theme of heartbreak through frustration of their narrator, all right? And then paragraph 3, both poets use the emotional distance between 2 people to discuss the theme of heartbreak. All right, so we have our 3 ideas, we have our 3 topic sentences, okay? You should always be using topic sentences, even when you're doing other exams. It's the first sentence in your paragraph that explains to your examiner what you're going to be looking at, okay? Right, so where do we go from there? Well, Once we have a topic sentence, now our next kind of task is to find, well, how did the two poems use that sub-theme of obsession or of frustration differently? So how do they portray it differently? How do they use it differently? What techniques do they use that are different? Because of course, in comparing, we don't just want to say what is the same about them. So again, we have two options, okay? These are the two different options. If we are looking, for example, at the subtheme of obsession, if you see on the left-hand side, it says paragraph 1. Both poets demonstrate the theme of heartbreak through their discussion of obsession, okay? So that is our topic sentence. Now, what do I do next? I figure out what the difference is between the two poems. So, neutral tones shows obsession through amount of lines in each stanza and the cyclical structure, whereas When We Two Parted shows obsession in the repetitive language and the cyclical structure. So what I've done in this case is I've shown how they're different with the techniques that they use. Okay, I did show a similarity, if you realized, because I did say that both use a cyclical structure, but I did show that they also have a difference, okay? One uses the amount of lines in each stanza to show the obsession, and the other one uses repetitive language, so repetition in the poem to show the obsession, okay? So that technique that is on the left-hand side shows how you can differentiate the poems using the techniques that they use. All right, and then we look at option 2, which I've used the second topic sentence to show, which was both poets look at the theme of heartbreak through the frustration of their narrator. So now the other option is to use specific details to differ the two poems. That means neutral tone shows the narrator's frustration for the lack of effort from their partner, whereas When We Two Parted shows the narrator is frustrated due to having his ego bruised. Okay, so there's different kinds or different reasons for the frustration. Okay, so what I'm gonna get is, I want in the chat very quickly, I want to see if anyone can summarize the difference between the two techniques that I've just used in those two paragraphs. Does anyone know what I've done? How would you summarize the difference between my paragraph 1 and my paragraph 2? Any ideas? Any ideas? Okay, so Sophie says, one is technique, one is detail. Perfect. May says one is technique and one is narrative. Very good. So one is, I'm going to be comparing how they use techniques differently. And one is, I'm going to be comparing how they look at that theme differently. Both techniques or both options here, both paragraphs would be absolutely fine. It's just about how you want to structure it and what you see are the main differences. Now, this is a high level comparison because what you're starting with is something that they share. So you think about it kind of like a pyramid. You're starting with something that they share, and then you're going into the fact that they are sharing something, but they do it differently. Or they are sharing something, but they view it differently. And Jalen asks, does that mean you can use narrative as the technique in the pedal-pedal structure? No, you still have to discuss, Jalen, different techniques that are being used to show that he is frustrated with the lack of effort from the partner, and the techniques that show that he is frustrated due to his ego being bruised. Okay? So, Cristobal, if I start off with saying they both discuss obsession in order to show how heartbroken they are, but one shows obsession through the cyclical structure and the other one shows obsession through repetition in the language. Okay, so hopefully it becomes a little bit more clear for those who are stuck in the next section, which is kind of what Jalen was asking, if you guys don't know what pedal pedals is. Right, so Once I know what I'm going to do, I can start looking at how I'm going to structure each paragraph, which is petal petals. Now, some of you might have heard that. Definitely anyone who has been in my class has heard that before. But for those of you who haven't, I'm going to go through what each letter means. But this is just a way to remember of how you are going to organize your paragraphs. Each paragraph needs to be petal petals. That's not 2 paragraphs, that's 1 paragraph, okay? Because a key thing is, and I often see this mistake, is that people separate the 2 poems. So they'll write 1 paragraph about neutral tones and they'll write 1 paragraph about When We Two Parted. But actually, you need to combine those. And I'll show you some examples again at the end so that you can see how that is done. All right? But petal petals is something that you can also kind of manipulate once you get the hang of it. That means that you could switch the order. You could put the T before the A or the A before the T, depending on how you want to work it. But first, in order to get the hang of it, follow that structure exactly, because it will help. All right. So here we go. Here is petal petals. All right. For anyone who wants to take notes, I'm going to leave this screen up for a little while explaining it. But it is the same thing each time, so it's repeated twice, right? So we start off the paragraph with our topic sentence. That's what we've just discussed. So both poets look at the theme of heartbreak through the frustration of their narrator, okay? Now, point A, so the first P, neutral tones shows the narrator's frustration for the lack of effort from their partner, all right? Then we go to E. So the P is the point, E is the evidence. What you're going to do is put your quote in there. So you're going to find a quote that shows that he's frustrated that his partner doesn't seem to put any effort into fixing their relationship. So you put a quote, okay? Then T stands for technique. So you're going to add in some kind of term, okay, some kind of terminology that links to what is being used in that quote. So is that quote a simile? Is that quote a metaphor? Is that quote part of the cyclical structure? Is that quote using thesaurus? Okay, so you could look at the punctuation, you could look at the language, you could look at the structure. It doesn't matter what you're using, but you have to link it to some kind of terminology, because we know that the examiners are looking for that in order to mark or give high marks, okay? So then we go to the A, which is the analysis. Now, a lot of people often skip this step, but actually, this is the step that allows you to get anything above a 4, that key analysis, which means, what is that evidence showing us, and how does it link to the frustration? Okay, so if you're saying there's a simile about a bird and how the bird flies away and it seems like the bird doesn't care, all right? And you are trying to argue that the bird mirrors, okay, or the bird represents, or the bird symbolizes the woman in the relationship who doesn't seem to care. That's your analysis. So you say, the simile of the bird shows that the woman in the relationship would rather fly away, be free like a bird, instead of focusing on fixing their relationship. Okay, so that analysis is the explanation that's going deep into, well, why does this show that she doesn't care? And then you need to make sure that you add in that this frustrates the narrator, because that's linking back to my topic sentence where I said they both talk about frustration, okay? In this analysis part, if you want to go a step further, you can also add in, how does it affect the reader? Okay, does the reader now feel sympathetic for the narrator? Do we feel bad for the narrator? Do we feel angry with the narrator? Do we feel like we can relate to the narrator? So that analysis can be an explanation and the effect on the reader. And then we have the L in the petal, which is the link. Now, a lot of people forget this as well, but you have to remember and that the examiners are looking for some kind of link to context, meaning, can you link the narrator's frustration to some kind of frustration that he felt in his real life, the poet felt in their real life? So maybe the poet wrote this poem and showed his frustration because actually he had a lot of frustration in his own marriage, which wasn't working out, which might be why he created this poem in the first place. Or maybe you link it to the history of when that poem was written. So you might say, in that time period, it was a very patriarchal society, and therefore he feels frustrated that the woman isn't trying when really the man should be the one who has the power over the relationship. So if you don't know personal things about the poet, then you can link it to the time period. Now, if you see, I also put /lenses. For those of you who have studied lenses in your classes, this is going to make sense. If this doesn't make sense at all, do not get frustrated. But a link is also a place where you can put in a lens, meaning through a psychoanalytical lens, we may think that this frustration is linked to blah, 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 blah. Okay? If you don't know what that means, don't worry. Okay? You might be looking at that in your classes soon. Okay? But that is your point where you can look at a psychoanalytical lens or a socioeconomical lens or a feminist lens, or link it to context. Now, the reason that that link, that L, is so important is because there are 6 marks available for links to context, links to lenses, multiple interpretations. That additional step, there are 6 marks available for that. And that is a huge grade difference between having those 6 marks and not, right? Okay, so in the same paragraph, I then look at the next poem and I say, neutral tones shows the narrator's frustration for the lack of effort from, oh, sorry, I've copied the same thing. But when we two parted, looks at the frustration of the man who has his ego bruised, okay? He feels frustrated because his ego is bruised. So that would be my point B. Then I would look for evidence. Where does it show that his ego feels bruised? Maybe when he says that when he hears her name, it sounds like a knell, right? Which is a funeral bell, which links to the fact that he's dead to her, or maybe he's ruined their relationship, killed their relationship, killed his reputation as a man, and so it is metaphorical. So that's my quote there, knell. And then my technique is metaphorical or auditory language, meaning language that you can hear, because a bell, you could hear it, right? And then again, the analysis. So how does that exact quote link to the narrator's frustration? Well, it looks at a metaphor that their relationship is dead, or maybe a metaphor for, okay, or maybe a metaphor for how their relationship is falling apart slowly, based on their egos, right? So their egos are being killed one by one. Her ego is destroyed. His ego is therefore being destroyed, right? Then we go into the link. Again, context or lens, up to you. And then ultimately, we have a summary sentence. So that is why it's petals, right? There's an S at the end that makes it plural, which is your summary sentence. Now, if you forget to do this summary sentence, it's not that big of a deal because it's very similar to your topic sentence, but it's just making sure that your paragraph sounds very nice and kind of cyclical, kind of wrapping up all your ideas into one sentence at the end, which means for example, although they explore it through different techniques, both poets use the idea of frustration to discuss the theme of heartbreak. Okay, now what I've done in that summary sentence is I've made sure that I've linked again the idea of frustration to heartbreak, because the real exam question is heartbreak. And I need to make sure that I tell my examiners, I know I just talked about frustration, but I'm talking about frustration because frustration is part of heartbreak. Okay, and that's what I do in my summary sentence. All right, okay, so that is my petals. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at a few example paragraphs. So hopefully everything that we've just looked at, let me go back. Hopefully you'll see how some of these students have used this petal-petal structure in order to organize their ideas. Now, I do want you to not freak out, because you will see that some of them, I've just added Samira, by the way, Lucia. Some of them have already played with the kind of organization of petals. So they didn't just do P-E-T-A-L. They might have done P-E-A-L-T or rearranged the letters. All right. So we're going to look at a few different ones. The first one I want to look at in whole. So we're going to read the whole 2 paragraphs that they've written, both comparative paragraphs, because you'll see that they've used this structure very clearly. All right. I did tell these people that I was going to use their work, and I did say to email me if you didn't want me to use it. So hopefully everyone's okay with me using their work here. Right. So this is from Sarah in year 10. And she was answering that same question. How do they explore heartbreak? Is Sarah in here? Yeah. No, maybe so. Yeah, Sarah, you. So what I'm going to do to Sarah, and she's going to hate me for this, but I'm actually going to find, well, Sarah, can you unmute yourself? Is that possible? Because what I'm going to ask you to do is read through these very slowly so everyone can hear you read your work. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. So Sarah is going to go through this. And I want everyone to listen closely. Sarah, make sure you do it slowly.
Wait, do you want me to read it?
Yeah.
Okay. Now?
Yeah.
Okay. Both Neutral Tones and When We Two Parted explore heartbreak through the theme of obsession. Thomas Hardy shows obsession by the fact that the speaker is in a constant state of denial. The poem is written in 4 stanzas, connoting the 4 seasons passing by. This could be interpreted as the speaker moving on from the relationship. However, the cyclical structure of the poem, it begins and ends with pond, juxtaposes this, since it highlights that the speaker has this inability to move on from the past. The fact that after many seasons passing, the narrator still hasn't moved on shows that his heartbreak has consumed him, and his denial has become an obsessive constant for him rather than a phase to move on from. Hardy rejected religion. The idea of being consumed by something could have been a comment on how 19th century people were heavily involved in religion and passively followed because it was the norm to. Lord Byron shows his obsession through hatred and bitterness. The repetition in the quote, "Long, long shall I rue thee," illuminates his obsession with her, and the verb rue demonstrates his regret and hatred. This unlocks the idea that the speaker disguises his heartbreak by obsessively trying to convince himself that he hates his former lover. This obsession could reflect how bruised the writer's ego is, since in the 19th century, men weren't used to being rejected by women.
Brilliant. Thank you. And in a second, Sarah, you can mute yourself, but in a second, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself again because you're going to read your second paragraph. Thank you very much. Okay. So if you look at Sarah's structure, she has followed what we just did to a T. So we have the topic sentence at the beginning with both neutral tones and when we two parted, explore heartbreak through the theme of obsession. All right. So she in this paragraph is going to look how both talk about obsession, but what she's done is she's looked at different types or different reasons for obsession. So if you try to find the 2 P's that are in this paragraph, you can find them actually quite easily, because the first one is Thomas Hardy shows obsession by the fact that the speaker is in, sorry, I'm going to add in, okay. Shows obsession by the fact that the speaker is in a constant state of denial. Okay, so in the first one that she's looking at, she's saying the obsession is shown through the denial. And then if you go all the way to the bottom, you'll see that the second P is there where it says Lord Byron shows his obsession through hatred and bitterness. So there's 2 different things. One shows it through the denial and one shows it through hatred and bitterness. And those are the 2 P's. Then she goes into a beautiful combination of technique and analysis. Now, Sarah has obviously done a very high level analysis here, because she goes back and forth between technique and analysis, technique and analysis, technique and analysis, and she doesn't just use one technique. If you're struggling to write a comparison, then please do just use one technique to begin with, because that will help you. So for example, when she talks about cyclical structure, you could have just talked about the cyclical structure, but she goes into further detail of talking about how there's the cyclical structure, but that this is juxtaposed with the stanzas connoting the 4 seasons. Okay, so she looks at 2 different techniques there, 2 different parts of the structure that are being compared. Okay, and then if you zoom a little bit forward, so we have technique analysis, so the TA, then we go into the link, which she does right before moving on to the next part, which shows Hardy rejected religion. The idea of being consumed by something could have been a comment on how of how the 19th century people were heavily involved in religion and passively followed because it was the norm to do so. Okay, so that is her link to context. If you realize she's kind of combined the history and the poet, so she looked at both. Now, in the second part, she does the same thing. She has Lord Byron shows his obsession through hatred and bitterness, which is the point. Okay, then we have the repetition, which is the technique. In the quote, long, long shall I rue thee, which is the evidence. Illuminates his obsession with her, and the verb rue demonstrates his regret and hatred. Verb, the fact that she used the word verb is already another technique. Sometimes your techniques don't need to be these high level words that you learn in lessons, but could be as simple as this verb or this adjective or this noun shows, whatever. Okay. And then she has her analysis there. Remember, I told you, don't forget the analysis part, where she writes, this unlocks the idea that the speaker disguises his heartbreak by obsessively trying to convince himself that he hates his former lover. Okay, so that's the analysis. So she's taken the quotes, she's shown how those quotes show obsession, but then she's linked it back again to heartbreak. And then the last line is the link. This obsession could reflect how bruised the writer's ego is, since in the 19th century, men weren't used to being rejected by women. So that is Sarah's link to the context, link to the time period. Now, again, if you notice, Sarah didn't use an S. So she didn't write a summary sentence here. You don't, like I said at the beginning, you do not have to write a summary sentence. Sometimes you've said enough in your paragraph to prove that you're linking it to heartbreak. If she wanted to, she could again write another sentence that says both discuss obsession through different techniques, but they use obsession to talk about heartbreak. All right. Is there any questions about that before I get Sarah to read her second paragraph? Thumbs up for Sarah, or thumbs up if that was a good example. Let's see. People who are giving her recognition. No, Sarah. Sorry. Okay, good. There we go, Lucia. Thank you. All right. So what I'm going to do, Sarah, is I'm going to move on to your second paragraph, where she has done the same thing. And what I want you guys to be able to see is that she's explored obsession and she's done a bunch of analysis. And then a lot of people are like, well, how do I move on to the second paragraph? And how do I do the same thing for another sub-theme? Okay, and not use the same techniques and not use the same links. All right, so here we go. Sarah, please read your second paragraph.
Moreover, both poets explore heartbreak through the theme of frustration, but Hardy shows it through lack of power, and Byron shows it through his pride and desire to fit societal stereotypes. In neutral tones, the use of oxymoron in the quote, deadest thing alive, suggests that the couple were not compatible at all. Death and life are 2 things that we as humans have no control over. This also reflects on how the speaker had no control over his relationship. Also, the use of direct pronouns such as your highlights that the speaker is blaming the women for their the woman for their parting, the blame demonstrates his frustration towards their breakup. In When We Two Parted, the quote, "They named thee before me and now in my ear," shows how she is the one who is being shamed for cheating. This could harm the speaker's pride, since in that time period, men were supposed to own the women, and the fact that she cheated on him shows that he couldn't control a woman. The use of auditory imagery in "Now in My Ear" suggests that the speaker is saying that the woman is dead to him, which shows that his desire to be a proper man is making him conceal his hurt with coldness and rejection. This shows that both speakers were frustrated, but in neutral tones, he showed it through his lack of power in the relationship, and in When We Two Parted, he shows it through his pride.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sarah. So if you see this one, again, perfect structure of the paragraph. She starts off with that topic sentence, and again, she's added in a conjunction there, so the transition word "moreover." So you could replace that with "also," or alternatively, if you're going to look at the opposite, whatever you want to write at the beginning. And then she's added in the sub-theme that she's going to look at, which is frustration. Okay, but if you notice, she goes right into saying that there is a difference between how they look at frustration, and she's in this case looked at the detail of the frustration, like I showed you in the very beginning, that she says one is frustrated through his lack of power, and the other is frustrated through his pride and desire to fit societal stereotypes. So those are the two differences. She also plays with the structure of the petals in this one, because if you notice, she kind of puts the link, so the context, throughout her analysis. So at one point she says, the use of direct pronouns such as "your" highlights that the speaker is blaming the woman for their parting. The blame demonstrates his frustration towards their breakup. Okay, but somebody is unmuted, but that's okay if you want to be unmuted. Okay, right afterwards, she shows how she is the one who is being shamed for cheating. This could harm the speaker's pride, since in the time period, men were supposed to own the woman, and the fact that she cheated on him shows that he couldn't control a woman. Okay, so that is a clear link to context. All right, yeah, so good, Sarah, you're receiving all your applause now. All right, so we see all of the different aspects of the petals, and I wanted to show you her second paragraph because she does a beautiful summary statement at the end, summary sentence at the end, that wraps up all of our ideas, where it says, this shows that both speakers were frustrated, but in neutral tones, he showed it through his lack of power in the relationship, and in When We Two Parted, he shows it through pride. Okay, so she does a beautiful summary there to say, this is exactly what I've just explained in this paragraph. So there's no space for the examiner to question whether she has fully explained something, because she's even just summarized what she said. Right, so we are now going to look at a second example, which is from Omatara in year 10. So she's also done the same thing. She also has used the structure quite well. I would probably add in a topic sentence at the beginning of this paragraph, but you'll see that her topic sentence is basically the 2 points that she separated. Okay, so Amatara, do you want to unmute yourself?
Okay.
Okay, right. So she's going to read it. Everyone listen.
Okay. In neutral tones, there's a strong sense of finality in terms of the heartbreak the narrator feels. Lines 9 to 10 emphasize the finality of heartbreak with the phrase, "The smile on your mouth was the deadest thing alive." Particularly, the use of an oxymoron, "deadest thing alive," creates a sense of ending on the female's end and may be interpreted to reflect the narrator's heartbreak. As he picks up on her expressions, the phrase is a juxtaposition of the smile upon the female's face in the next line. Contextually, in the Victorian times, men were superior, meaning the husband would ideally dictate the relationship status. So the writer Hardy has put the narrator in an unconventional and vulnerable position to make the reader experience his emotional pain due to heartbreak. In addition, the rhyme scheme of the third stanza reflects the narrator having no escape from the heartbreak, as he uses an ABBA rhyme scheme. On the other hand, in When We Two Parted, there's a foreboding sense of hope on the narrator's side, despite the heartbreak. The structure of the poem mirrors the sense of hope the narrator has, while juxtaposing the heartbreak at the same time. The stanzas move through the time frames, journeying through the past to the future, reflecting hope for the future. Despite the hope, there is still a sense of heartbreak through the constant use of breaking the accentual verse. The poet wants the readers to feel the heartbreak strongly. Using connotations of negativity, including the Lexis root in the reference to the woman, but still present heartbreak as leaving, but still presents heartbreak as leaving a little room for hope.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Amatara. So in this case, Amatara has done it slightly differently, still following one of the techniques we looked at, which is looking at the different kinds of detail that you can use in your analysis. So she has looked at how they express heartbreak differently. In neutral tones, she says it feels like finality and ending, whereas when we two parted, seems like there's still a little bit of room for hope. So one ending, one having a little bit of room for hope. That's the difference between the two. Now, she could have added that in with a topic sentence, but she doesn't need to because she made it very clear. You can again see how she mixes the terminology and the analysis going back and forth. She looks at juxtapositions, she looks at oxymorons. She has more than one quote in each. She even adds in, which Sarah did as well, and everyone needs to do if they're aiming for those top grades, you look at the structure as well. So she's adding in structural things. Okay, she's looking at, Sarah looked at the cyclical structure, Amatara looks at the rhyme scheme. Okay, so they're adding in not just language analysis, but also structural analysis. They don't need to separate it. They can mix it up how they please, all right? And you can also see she adds in the link, the L in the petals, where she says, contextually, in the Victorian times, men were superior, meaning the husband would ideally dictate the relationship status. So the writer Hardy has put the narrator in an unconventional and vulnerable position. And what she does here next is very, very high level, where she goes, yeah, this is the context. And he uses that context in order to make the reader feel a specific thing. Okay, so she's linked the context to the effect on the reader, right? I have somebody else's example coming up. Do we have Eugenia in this session? I'm not sure. Eugenia, are you in this session? I don't know if she is. Does anyone know? I can't see all of the participants, but I just wanted to go through something that Eugenia did differently, because I wanted to, like I said at the very beginning, show you an example of how the option one that we didn't go through is done. I'm not going to read through everything that Eugenia has done, but I'm going to show you the different kind of methods she's used to structure her ideas. So in her first paragraph, she looked at both poets. So she says, the poets of both neutral tones and When We Two Parted both explore the theme of heartbreak through an emphasis on tense used. Okay, so she goes into deep discussion actually in this paragraph about everything structural. Okay, so she looks at enjambments, she looks at cyclical structures, she looks at how the past tense changes to the present tense. Okay, so she looks at everything structural that the two poems do that links to heartbreak. And then if I move to her second paragraph, in her second paragraph, she says, aside from structure, language is also used in both poems to show their different feelings about heartbreak. So if you remember back to the beginning, I said you could do it language, structure, or structure, language, or language, structure, or whatever it might be. That's how Eugenia decided to do it. It's just as high of a level of analysis, so don't feel like you have to do the sub-themes. But remember that if you are going to split it into language and into structure, that you need to be using a lot more evidence and not just one piece of evidence to link to structure or one piece of evidence to link to language, okay? So in this one, she looks at all the different kind of language techniques, the color language, the monochrome, I can see in the simplistic vocabulary. All right, she looks at the oxymorons, She looks at a lot of things, the juxtaposition, lexical field of death, so that she can link it to there. She also links it all to context. All right. So though there are two options there that you can use, either looking at the sub themes. Okay, so if I go to the very beginning again, you can do it with looking at sub-theme, 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 or language structure. Now, if you see, I've put in parentheses if time. So a lot of people are only able to write 2 comparative paragraphs. Think about how long those comparative paragraphs are that you just saw, that the students wrote. And remember that you have about 50 minutes, 50, to write these paragraphs. So if you are struggling with time, it is okay to write just 2 paragraphs. Your aim would be to get 3 in, but if you are struggling with time, 2 is all right, okay? Okay, so last thing that I'm going to mention for today is a few additional resources for if you are looking on how to organize these, or if you are struggling with the actual content of the poems. All right, so Mr. Sales Teaches English is a page on YouTube that has a lot of instructions of how to organize poetry comparisons, and in different ways and different techniques than what I've just shown you. Mr. Bruff also, I know you all know him, but he also has a video on how to organize GCSE poetry comparisons. BBC Bite-Size guides are online for free, and they go through that as well. And just so that everybody knows, the previous Zoom sessions that we looked at, specific poems, are on the Eltham Hill YouTube page. And now, last night, I've just added as well revision videos that some of the year 10s created. So they are on the, yes, Shakira, you're right, Mr. Bruff is a G. But the revision resources that they've made, the videos, so Nancy, May, and Sia have created 6 videos for 6 of the different poems. They are on the Eltham Hill YouTube website or webpage, so please go and see them. They explore structure, themes, and context, so make sure you look at that. Jalen says GCSE pod is good for poetry as well. Yeah, there's a lot of different sites and a lot of different resources that you can look at. Zainab, I don't know how to answer that question yet, but as soon as we know, I am sure that your teachers will be telling you. All right. So are there any last minute questions for anyone? Does anyone want to ask anything about how to structure poetry comparisons? Something they're still confused on? Or just put smiley faces to see that everyone, okay, Zainab, I'm very happy that you understand now. Good. So lots of you. Good. Right. Brilliant, guys. So hopefully that helps. That is one way to look at it. I'm sure your teachers have taught you other ways as well. So please don't think that one way is better than the other. Jasmine says, can you use it in all poem comparisons? Yes, you can. You can always use that to write any poetry comparison. All right, guys, that is it for us today. Hopefully that helped. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the day and enjoy the sun if you can. I'm going to stop sharing so maybe we can see each other again. Okay. All right, guys, have a lovely, lovely rest of the day, and I will see you next Tuesday? Yeah, next Tuesday at 1 o'clock. I'll send out the Zoom passwords again through class charts. All right, bye guys.